Now we remember looks at great-great-grandfather John, or Johnny McLay. John was born in Kirkintilloch, East Dunbartonshire, Scotland, in 1841. The eldest child of Thomas John McLay and Margaret Russell, whom had married the previous year. Growing up in Kirkintilloch, John was only 8 years old when, along with his family, they boarded a ship and sailed to a distant and foreign land, New Zealand. Johnny McLay became part of the pioneering era of Otago, and upon the untimely death of his father Thomas John, he became the logical McLay family patriarch, residing for over 60 years in Waikouaiti in East Otago. Married to Ellen Bray in 1861, they raised their 11 children in the district. Kirkintilloch lies 13 kilometres northeast of central Glasgow and has an interesting and varied history. The first known settlement on this site was that of a Roman fort dating from the mid-2nd century. The fort was one of many Roman forts that was established along the Antonine Wall, a turf fortification on stone foundations. The walls stretched across the central belt of Scotland, one of the northernmost frontiers of Roman Britannia. There is no strong evidence of habitation on the site for the following 1,000 years, until a castle and church were established here in the 12th century by Clan Cumming. The castle was of some importance during the Wars of Independence in the late 13th and early 14th centuries, and is thought to have been destroyed on the orders of Robert the Bruce in the latter years of the conflict.
Aye, a Bruce.
In January 1746, as the retreating Jacobite army of Prince Charles Stuart passed north through the town, one of the Highland Army's stragglers was shot dead by a man hidden in a barn. On hearing of the shooting, Charles halted his army and threatened to raze the town.
I will raze this town to the ground.
In return for an unspecified payment, the town magistrate persuaded him to continue his march, and the town was spared.
I shall spare this town.
Kirkintilloch was one of the hotbeds of the Industrial Revolution in Scotland, beginning with the emergence of a booming textile industry. With the construction of the Forth and Clyde Canal and the establishment of the Monkland and Kirkintilloch Railway, the town developed further as an important transportation hub, inland port and production centre of iron, coal, nickel and even small ships. John's younger brother James was born in 1843, also in Kirkintilloch, around the time his father Thomas John began work as a railway ganger on the local railway network. The family first moved to a stone cottage at Garngavor and then to the nearby hamlet of Oxgame, where Janet in 1845 and Mary in 1846 were born. John attended 3 schools in the Kirkintilloch area. The first was near the Forth and Clyde Canal, where he often played truant to avoid the harsh schoolmaster. Another was across the road from his aunt Mary Russell, whose husband ran a weaving establishment and where John had a daily meal. The McLays being a God-fearing family, the Sabbath was strictly observed. In 1849, Thomas John and Margaret made the decision to emigrate to New Zealand. Although not recorded, there could have been a number of reasons for this, such as the opportunity for advancement for the family in a new land, increased prosperity, the ability to own land, or just a sense of adventure and excitement. The fact that Thomas John had secured an engagement to work for Alexander Todd would have provided the family with a sense of security and purpose. How this employment was secured is not known, but it does appear that they were assisted immigrants, as previously mentioned. September 12, 1849 saw the Multan leave Greenock, bound for Otago, New Zealand. Among the 158 passengers were John, his brother James, younger sisters Janet, also known as Jessie, and Mary, along with their parents Thomas John and Margaret. The journey would take 3.5 months. As an 8-year-old, life aboard the Multan would have been an extremely exciting adventure for John. While becalmed during the voyage, John caused a great commotion one evening while everyone was at dinner.
There's a boy up there in the rigging! There's a boy up there!
He climbed high into the rigging of the ship and hid. Unable to climb down, 2 crew were sent up to rescue him. One being a David Dunlop, who John had become very fond of, helping and easing him down.
Hey, come on, Johnny boy. Come on, Johnny boy.
Members of the crew also saved John from a thrashing at the hands of Thomas John, telling his father that
"He should be prouder, John, as not one in 100 boys of his age could have done what he had."
in his latter years, John wrote in some considerable detail of the voyage to New Zealand and their subsequent arrival there. However, given the passage of time, some of John's early memories of the voyage may have been somewhat embellished, in particular an apparent encounter with pirates off the coast of Africa.
Ship ahoy!
The Multan sighted a smart-looking craft a long way off, which then increased its sail and began steering towards the ship at speed. The Multan's captain had every man he could muster come on deck, and all women and children stay below. The presence of a great number of men on deck had the desired effect to dissuade the supposed pirates, and they
Passed by at a terrific rate.
as noted by John in later life. None of the other accounts from the voyage of the Multan mentioned this event, including the diary of Francis Pillins, a gentleman passenger. The first sighting of New Zealand was also remembered by John.
Then the first land to be seen was the coast of New Zealand. It seemed to be clad in forest. From the first sight of New Zealand after 14,000 miles, it was a wonder to all on board to see the great forest, that it extended from the south all along the coast right up to Port Chalmers.
Along with his first sightings of local Maori.
The first change in the landscape was the Maori huts and sandhills inside Tyrol Head, where we cast anchor for the day. Great lots of Maori came out in boats and had a great look around at the figurehead of the Multan. Both Maori men and women seemed highly excited over it. Next day, we got to Port Chalmers in good time. It was Christmas Day. We had a yellow flag flying, having had cholera on board. None of the passengers were allowed to land until local authorities granted leave to land. Then a lot of passengers went ashore and got fresh beef for their Christmas dinner.
The McLay family disembarked on December 26, 1849, and John once again in his memoir wrote fondly of saying goodbye to the Multan.
And now, dear old Multan, I must fare ye farewell forever. I hope God will spare you and your gallant crew through many storms. We are fast parting. The fair wind is driving us swiftly over the smooth water of the estuary that leads to Dunedin. We got up all right, and Father was there, and carried us ashore, and 2 men helped carry the things we had bought from Scotland. From here, a man with horse and cart, I think there was only one horse and cart in Dunedin at the time, took us up to the house.
The family temporarily settled in a house on present-day Rattray Street, with John obviously quite taken with the local flora and fauna.
Aye, it were a wild place. Bush and swamp all around us, and plenty of wild pigs in the bush, and plenty of cocker and pigeon, and plenty of ducks and teal, and fish, barracuda and grouper, brought to Dunedin by local Maori and sold to the population.
A few local Maori were camped near the McLay home, and John noted that he and the other children were at first quite naturally wary of them. The local iwi, or tribe, were the Kai or Nai Tahu. They had been congregated around the Otago Heads for a decade, and were on amicable terms with the pioneer settlers. Many had adopted the European ways and manner of dress. After about 3 weeks in Rattray Street, the McLays were rowed across the harbour to Anderson's Bay, and after some temporary accommodation they moved into a house that had been built overlooking the Tomahawk Lagoon, a humble dwelling with its mud brick walls and floors. After 3 years of settlement, Dunedin still had no real roads, only foot tracks. No drainage or sewage or water. Provisions were in short supply until occasional vessels replenished basic foodstuffs like flour and salt. Education was in even shorter supply, with the first schools being privately run, often by untrained persons and fee-paying. John's only education other than what he had received in Scotland was delivered spasmodically in 1850 and 1851. The school was located where the present law courts are today in Dunedin. This was a long journey from Tomahawk, around 8 kilometres, through an incredibly swampy area, over 2 muddy, deep creeks that ran with a strong current due to the tides. The risk of drowning was ever present.
Watch yourself on the way to Anderson's Bay.
John's attendance at the school was infrequent. Being the eldest, his help at home was often needed to bring in the cows, collect firewood, and act as a nursemaid to his younger sisters. Margaret was born in 1850, and Mary, aged 5, was often in poor health. John, in later life, lamented his lack of formal education. The family moved again in 1852 to Grants Braes, a further 3 kilometres down the harbour from Dunedin. John often had to walk to Dunedin to get various provisions for his mother, a long and arduous trek, through bush, over rough tracks and around the swampy headwaters of the harbour, an even harder return journey with a sometimes heavy load for a boy aged 11. Later the supplies were brought in Arthur Burns' cutter, the Annie Lorry. There was also a dinghy in which John learned to scull. John was a quick learner and was soon at ease on the harbour and put his newly acquired skills to good use, ferrying both supplies and farm workers to and from Dunedin. In some cases, his passengers were often a little worse for wear after being on the run at one of the settlement's public houses. Later in 1852, John's younger brother Thomas was born, and by May the harvest at Grants Braes was completed. The McLay family moved back to Dunedin to Squatters Gully, above what is now McLagan Street. Thomas John had bought the rights to the land and dwelling from a man named McLean. In 1853, the family moved north to the Waikouaiti district. Thomas John had been employed by Johnny Jones to work for him on his land at Cherry Farm as a ploughman and stacker, and John, now aged 12, was to drive the team at plough and draw timber for fencing and firewood. After moving back to Dunedin briefly in 1854, the family returned to the district and their work at Cherry Farm later in the year. John's younger sister Elizabeth was born a short time later. During the following years, the family continued to work on the land for Jones. In 1856, the twins David and Anne were born, and 2 years later, in 1858, Agnes. In 1858, St John's Anglican Church was opened in Waikouaiti. John, who was still employed by Johnny Jones driving a bullock team, drew some of the materials landed at the Waikouaiti Beach Sandspit for the church and parsonage, which was erected the same year. (1858) also saw the arrival of the Bray family from England aboard the Lord Worsley. Benjamin Bray I was engaged by Johnny Jones to care for the dairy herd at Cherry Farm, while his wife Eliza and eldest daughter Ellen, aged 16, were to be the dairymaids. The family journeyed from Dunedin aboard the Anne Jane. At the sandspit at the southern end of Waikouaiti Beach, John was waiting with his bullock dray to meet the Reverend J. A. Fenton and his family. Fenton was the first vicar of the newly completed St. John's Anglican Church. John is said to have remarked on the youth and beauty of Ellen Bray, stating to a companion that she was the girl he would marry. An awful tragedy would strike the Brays on their arrival at Waikouaiti, as on landing Ellen's younger sister Elizabeth was drowned. The landing at the sandspit could be treacherous at times. Elizabeth was only 10, and she is buried in the St. John's Church Cemetery. After a time, Ellen's father Benjamin acquired his own farm on the upper slopes of Dunedin Hill, at the back of the Hawkesbury settlement. Ellen's younger brother Benjamin Bray II continued the family's local farming tradition until his passing in 1901. It is highly probable to assume that in the late 1850s, John McLay and Ellen Bray would have become acquainted through their mutual employment for Johnny Jones at Cherry Farm. How their relationship developed is not documented, or for that matter the length of their engagement. It is noted that in 1860, John is still employed by Johnny Jones in general farm labouring and driving a bullock team, drawing timber and supplies for Jones's various business interests in the district. In 1861, John and Ellen were married in St. John's Anglican Church in Beach Street. At first they lived in a two-roomed cottage on the lower slopes of Dunedin Hill. By this time John had left the employment of Jones and had acquired his own bullock team, setting himself up as a haulage contractor, drawing posts and sawn timber for farms and buildings. The year before, in 1860, Johnny Jones conceived the idea of subdividing the West Hawkesbury area in present-day Waikouaiti into quarter-acre sections, free title being given to anyone who built a house of a certain value. It is probable that first Thomas John and then John took advantage of this offer, both building in Henry Street. John's home was named Multan House, an obvious homage to the Multan, the vessel whom John was so fond of. It consisted of a large living room with a large fireplace, a parlour, 2 bedrooms on the ground floor and 2 attic rooms above. Here John and Ellen would bring up their 11 children. There is every possibility that this photo of John was taken outside Multan House, to the left of the driveway pictured. In March 1861, John drove the first spring cart in the district. These were a great improvement over the heavy unsprung drays and carts used previously. It was shipped out to the Waikouaiti River from Dunedin and unloaded by local Maori with their whale boats, then brought up to the township on a bullock dray.
Gold! Gold!
In May of 1861, Gabriel Reed, an Australian prospector, discovered a significant amount of gold in Otago on the Tuapeka River near Lawrence. This began the Otago Gold Rush, with subsequent finds leading to other rushes in other parts of inland Otago in the following years. The winter of 1862 saw gold discovered in the Dunstan-Cromwell area by prospectors Hartley and Riley. That same year, John and Ellen's first child, Henry, was born. Following the sudden death of his father, Thomas John McLay, in August 1862, John became involved as a transporter of goods and supplies for the goldfields. At the time, there was no good road connecting Waikouaiti with Dunedin, so prospectors and goods would arrive daily via small vessels, landing at Waikouaiti Beach, where they would then make their way up Beach Street to where the main commercial area was situated. Here wagoners with bullock and horse teams would load stores for the goldfields.
Get them wagons loaded and move them out.
The best route to these diggings was the natural track via the Shag or Waihemo River Valley and Dunback. Then on through Waihemo and Morrison's, over the notorious Dead Horse Pinch, and to the Pig Root Hotel, often stopping for the night. One further push over the top of the Pig Root, then over the Swineburn, then out onto the Upper Tyree Plain, or Maniatoto, at Kyburn. From there, John and his team would travel across the plain, passing close to the base of Mount Ida, then into the Manahirakia Valley, then to Dunstan and Clyde. The route to Clyde and the Dunstan was an arduous and often dangerous journey, over rocky and exposed tussock land on rough and rutted tracks, through rivers and streams. Extreme heat in the summer and the bitter freezing cold of winter confronted both prospector and wagoner, a distance of around 120 miles. At Clyde, the goods were unpacked and taken up the Cromwell Gorge by pack horse to the Hartley and Riley and other claims further on. Gold fever was at its height in the early 1860s, and these were hard and tough days. Drink was the solace of many at the frequent hotels and public houses that sprang up along with the many shanties throughout the goldfields. Some of the original hotels remain today, others long gone.
Hey, they were some wild times on the goldfields.
For John, a strong wrestler like his father Thomas John, there was relaxation and regular wrestling matches on the goldfields and with his friend the baker from Clyde.
Aye, he were a great wrestler, were Tommy.
In 1863, gold was discovered at the Hogburn, near present-day Naseby, and along with new fields at St. Bathans, Kyburn and Thompson's Gorge at Matakanui, these provided John with added business, carting supplies to these areas en route to the Dunstan.
Are you going through to Dunstan, Johnny? Aye, Robert, I am. And with a hefty load.
Some of these mining locations boasted populations in the thousands at the height of the rush. However, as the gold ran out, many of the miners left to try their luck elsewhere.
Hey, luck has deserted me. I'm heading to the west coast.
I hear there's plenty of gold to be found on the coast.
I think I'll try me luck with you then, Francis.
You're more than welcome, Stephen.
The population dwindled to a handful, or in some cases, nothing. On occasion, the only evidence of their existence was where they had buried their dead. John was once driving his wagon with a good load south of Palmerston near Goodwood and was coming down a hill. He had seated himself on the pole to ease his tired legs when the dangling lash of the whip accidentally tickled the crown of one of the bullock's heads, making the brute jerk. This unseated John, and he fell under the wagon, which empty weighed over a ton. The heavy wagon was upon him, but quickly he braced his chest and the wagon passed right over him.
Oh, my Christ!
The accident was seen by a local, who rushed to him and persuaded John to drive his horse and gig home to Waikouaiti, while he followed with the team.
You're not right to drive, John. You're not right.
In 1864, John and Ellen welcomed a daughter into the world, Mary, who was later known as Polly. Later that same year, the main road north out of Waikouaiti was built. John was the first to drive a cart on the newly constructed road. This also signalled the end of the Beach Street boom, with the majority of stores and other businesses dismantled and rebuilt on the main road where the present township stands. The city of Dunedin reaped many of the benefits of the Otago Gold Rush, for a period becoming New Zealand's largest population centre, even though it was only founded in 1848. Many of the city's stately buildings date from this period of prosperity, and New Zealand's first university, the University of Otago, was founded in 1869, with wealth derived from the goldfields. However, the rapid decline in gold production from the mid-1860s led to a sharp drop in the province's population, and while not unprosperous, the region never rose to such relative prominence again. By 1866, the main rush was over, and prospectors left for other goldfields in the South Island. However, many miners remained, laboriously reworking the various gold fields. They were also joined by thousands of Chinese miners, invited by the province to rework claims. And later commercial mining resulted in a large number of miners becoming paid employees for mining companies, including river dredging operations. In 1866, Ellen gave birth to Amy, a second daughter for herself and John. With the gold rush being over, John concentrated on his work as a local contractor in and around Waikouaiti, with the files of the Palmerston and Waikouaiti Times recording his tenders to the Hawkesbury County Council.
There you go, Charlie. There you go. Now study.
John and Ellen's fourth child, Jessie Maria, was born in 1869, and between then and 1884 they had a further 9 children, all born in Waikouaiti. John in 1871, Charles William, or Charlie, born in 1873, Eliza Helen in 1875, Elizabeth Esther in 1876, great-grandfather Thomas Benjamin in 1878, and Russell James McLay, born in 1880. In 1883, twin girls Hope and Faith were stillborn. Sadly, an all too common occurrence in many families of this period. John and Ellen's last and 13th child, Edith May, was born in 1884, when Ellen was 42 years old. From January 1878, education became free and compulsory, and the register from the Waikouaiti Public School shows all the children of John and Ellen being enrolled from the state. The school leaving age at the time was 14. By the 1880s, the use of bullock teams had begun to decline due to better roads and improved horse-drawn vehicles. However, John, first with his eldest son Henry, and later Charlie, were still employed by remote settlers to do rough pioneer work, such as the removal of trees and heavy ploughing. Charlie is shown here with his bullock team and a group of bushmen felling and clearing native timber in the Waikouaiti district in the 1890s. John was well known and highly respected as a skillful owner and driver of bullock teams and wagons. Charlie went on to run his own team, completing contracting work such as carting wool, timber, fencing materials and shifting houses. It is also highly likely that Charlie moved more into horse-drawn contracting at the turn of the century. It was noted by John's son Thomas Benjamin McLay in 1962 that John was fluent in Maori and had obvious close dealings with local Maori right from his arrival in New Zealand and through his working life. 1893 saw the unfortunate passing of John McLay Jr., aged 22. There is no real information regarding the passing of John, other than he died without issue, meaning he died without children. John is buried with his parents John and Ellen McLay in St. John's Anglican Church Cemetery in Beach Street, Waikouaiti. Ellen McLay signed the women's suffrage petition in 1893. The petition led to New Zealand becoming the first self-governing nation in the world where women won the right to vote. It was signed by close to 1/4 of the female adult population, and was at the time the largest petition of its kind signed in the Western world. Margaret McLay née Russell John's mother passed away at Waikouaiti later in 1893. She was aged 74 and was buried in St. John's Cemetery. By 1909, all of John and Ellen's children had married except for Jessie, who married later in life. John by this stage had become a deeply religious man. He joined the primitive Methodist Church in Waikouaiti. John, who had been a drinker in his earlier years, now referred frequently in his writings to the evils of strong drink, and even took up Sabbath school teaching. But his age and gentle manner were against him, and he did not find the task easy. In his latter years, John won something of a reputation as a local historian. He was held in high regard for his knowledge of the past, recording his memories of the McLay family's journey to New Zealand and their early days in Dunedin. Along with his love for his large family, John was a great lover of nature and would disappear to a hut on Mount Watkin, as if to commune with his surroundings. His reactions and feelings were recorded with poetic sensitivity, and his notes decorated with excellent drawings of trees, the totara, remu, kohai, and others. The Palmerston Jubilee celebrations in December 1913 were John's last association with a bullock wagon and team.
Welcome to the Palmerston and District Jubilee.
For this occasion, his son Charlie assembled a fine team of animals, having to buy some of them from as far afield as Tapanui in West Otago. It was the showpiece of the grand procession, with Charlie aloft to drive the team and his father walking proudly beside. 3 years later, on the 17th of December 1916, John McLay passed away at his home Mouton House in Henry Street, Waikouaiti. He was aged 75. His daughter Jessie returned home to look after her mother Ellen until her death in July 1920, aged 78. Both John and Ellen are buried in St. John's Anglican Church Cemetery. They are both commemorated on the same headstone, along with their son John, who died in 1893. John McLay can be described as a man of strong conviction, with a gentle manner and personality. Physically, John was a big man, 5'11", strong, with a distinct bushy forked dark beard. He had an obvious gift when dealing with stock and beasts of burden, working with his father before venturing on his own as a bullock team contractor, cultivating land and hauling goods and materials in the East Otago district, and further afield to the Otago goldfields at the height of the rush. It seemed apparent that John had a love of the sea and all things nautical, and may have been discouraged as a youngster from a career as a mariner. John's wife, Ellen Bray, was born in Shropshire, emigrating to New Zealand with her family in 1858. There is little information on Ellen's life, but like most pioneering women of the period, she was hard-working and dealt with the trials of providing a home for a large family with a cheerfulness. John and Ellen had to mourn the tragic loss of children in their lifetime, no doubt a sad and stressful time, but dealt with dignity. Although a lot of the finer details of John and Ellen's lives remain a mystery, There is plenty of evidence of a couple who were held in great regard by the Waikouaiti community, and they both must be admired for their hard work, tenacity, and above all else, their love of family.